네, 여러분 케빈 애쉬튼을 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Please welcome our speaker with a big round of applause.
If I can figure out how to do it. It's going to be in two parts, I think. Okay. Feel free to smile if you feel happy. Very good. Thank you. I'm now going to post this on the internet. I use WeChat. So if you happen to have WeChat, you can go see yourself. So what I just did seemed very kind of ordinary today. I took a small device from my pocket, took some high-definition pictures of everybody here in Busan, and now they're on the internet for the world to see. Had I done that 15 years ago, it would have seemed quite miraculous. And maybe 16 or 17 years ago, had somebody predicted that technology would be possible, I think it would have probably seemed ridiculous. And this is the progression of innovation. When you first hear an idea, a new idea, it can seem quite ridiculous. And then for a brief moment when the idea becomes real, it seems miraculous. And then we use the technology regularly, and it quickly becomes monotonous and ordinary. And we forget how quickly things can change. So as we go through the World Ocean Forum over the next few days, I encourage everybody to keep that in mind as you hear new ideas. The new ideas that can seem ridiculous can quickly become true, and we can quickly become used to them. And I'll give you an example of that. I want to talk about the Internet of Things in the ocean, but just to provide a little context on how innovation happens. This is a picture of an ocean, actually, but it's not an ocean on Earth. It's an ocean beneath the surface of Pluto, a dwarf planet very, very far away, the furthest away planet in our solar system. And this is a photograph. It's color enhanced, but it's a photograph. It's an actual picture. And I'd just like to sort of take you through the story of how this picture came to be. 88 years ago, Pluto looked like this. This was the first ever picture of Pluto when Pluto was first discovered. And it looks kind of crude and strange today, but this was miraculous in its time. Someone had taken a photograph of a very far away object. And over the years, as technology improved, our picture of Pluto improved. So 24 years ago, 7 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And what's happening here is we now have a spacecraft traveling to Pluto and sending back photographs. And that leads us to this picture taken 39 months ago by the spacecraft. It's called New Horizons. It's color enhanced, but this is an actual photograph. And what we see here in the middle, shaped a little bit like a heart, is the top of a subsurface ocean of water, liquid water, far, far away. This is not the only planet with an ocean. What's interesting about this picture is how it tells the story of innovation. You see things improve, but you also see what happens after innovation, because the most recent photograph taken by the New Horizons spacecraft is this one, which looks a little bit like that first picture of Pluto we saw more than 80 years ago. And this is not a picture of Pluto. This is a picture of an object in the Kuiper belt, which is kind of this big circle of rocks and other objects orbiting at the farthest extremities of the sun's gravitational pull, the very edges of our solar system. This is a Kuiper belt object, and the spacecraft that took the pictures of Pluto is now traveling to take pictures of this object. So we go from this blurry vision of the future to something very clear and amazing, and then we start all over again. And that is the pattern of innovation. And what's underlying that story is a series of incredible charts or curves on charts that chart the progress of human creative behavior. We are a unique species. We are able to not just use tools, other animals also use tools. Birds build nests, for example, but we don't just use tools, we consciously improve our tools. And it's that conscious improvement that enables us to do all these amazing things. So underlying that picture of Pluto, for example, we see innovation like this, the ability to launch things into space ever more cheaply. Innovations like this in digital photography. Digital photography really didn't exist before about 1990. And it was very expensive and very low resolution. And over the course of the last 25 years, we've seen incredible advances in digital photography, which enable things like that picture to be taken. Something else we've lived through is an incredible improvement in the amount of data you can put onto a radio wave. That photograph from Pluto was sent back using radio. It's a very high-definition picture. You need to be able to get a lot of data onto a radio wave to be able to achieve that. And what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years is a rapid improvement in the efficiency of wireless communications. And it's trends like this that drive innovation in every field. And it's not just electronics, and it's not just space. So, another example from healthcare and biological sciences is it's not that long ago that we first sequenced the human genome. So it's about 12 years since we first sequenced the human genome. But in the intervening years, we've had this huge exponential decrease in the cost of genome sequencing. And this will continue. So it's much easier to look at human DNA today than it was 15 years ago because it's much cheaper. This also applies to the oceans. Everywhere you look, everywhere there is human innovation, you will see these kind of trends. I mean, it's interesting, by the way, that trends to do with sort of microelectronics and core information technology, they tend to be exponential trends. And trends to do with more physical things and more complex systems, bigger things, tend to be sort of polynomial, but they're all rapid change. So this is an example from the oceans. Just in the last 20 or 30 years, the amount of shipping capacity in the world has increased massively. From about 1 million, a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. It's a shipping container, a standard shipping container, basically. So about 1 million shipping containers containers worth of shipping in the world in 1990, increasing well beyond 20 million shipping containers worth of shipping in the world today. All driven by innovation, all driven by technology. So that's the context, in my view, of the World Ocean Forum. We have come here to talk about how to improve things, how to drive change, and what enables that is our ability to continually improve our technology, which then allows us to do new and wonderful things. In the context of the Internet of Things, there's a couple of these trends that are particularly important in my view, and that have really driven the development of the Internet of Things in the last 20 years. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of when I first coined the term the Internet of Things. So we're about 20 years into this new world, and one of the things we've seen in that 20 years is internet connectivity has improved massively. The amount of data you can transmit via the internet in 1 second has increased exponentially. Another very important trend for the Internet of Things is called Kumi's law. Now, you may be familiar with Moore's law, which was a big driver of computer technology in the 20th century. Moore's law said that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit doubled every 18 to 24 months. Basically, computers got smaller and faster every 18 to 24 months. In the 21st century, Kumi's law is probably as important, in my view. And what Kumi's law says is the amount of energy required to perform a computation halves every 18 months, and has done so since computers were invented. And what that means is computers are becoming less and less dependent on batteries and power outlets and recharging now. You know, the computers, you know, think about your cell phone or your laptop, it can do more and it probably lasts longer between charges. Some of that is improvement in batteries, but a lot of it is improvement in the power efficiency of computing. It's Kumi's law. And in the Internet of Things world, what we want to do is distribute wireless sensors throughout the world so computers can gather their own information. So being able to distribute electronic sensors, small computers that never need to be recharged, that have batteries that never run down, is a very powerful thing in the Internet of Things age. And here's an example of that in real life. One of the underlying technologies in the Internet of Things is something called an RFID tag, a radio frequency identification tag. It's kind of like the amoeba of the wireless network world, the simplest network computer you can think of. It's just a chip that knows its identification number and that can communicate that wirelessly. And I have one in my pocket. If you're staying in the hotel, your hotel key card is an example of RFID technology. And it doesn't need a battery. There's no battery in this device. It needs very little power to operate because of Kumi's law. And it gets its power from the device that's communicating with it. So when you wave this in front of the door of your hotel room, the reading device on the door emits a radio wave, and there's just enough power in the radio wave to turn the chip on and make it work. And what we've seen in the last few years is we've made 1 billion more RFID tags a year than we have smartphones. So if you think there are a lot of smartphones in the world, there's a lot more RFID tags. And that's a foundational technology in the Internet of Things. So the fact is we are now able to distribute wireless computers, disposable wireless computers, around the world. And our ability to do that will just keep increasing because of those trends. There's a misunderstanding about the Internet of Things I just want to clear up before we talk about the Internet of Things and the ocean. And the misunderstanding is that the Internet of Things is gadgets and household toys that talk to apps on your phone or something. These are real examples. This is a smart wine bottle. I guess it tells you whether or not you're drunk. If you need a wine bottle to tell you whether or not you're drunk, you're probably already drunk. There's a smart bikini, tells you whether you're getting sunburned. A smart water bottle tells you whether you need to drink water. And this is a smart shaver that tells you whether or not you need to shave. Now, all these products are useless. You know whether or not you need to drink water, you feel thirsty. You know whether or not you've shaved in the morning. I have not shaved this morning. This is not the Internet of Things. And if it was, it wouldn't be worth my time or yours talking about it in respect to the ocean. But sometimes in popular newspapers, magazines, and so on, this is how the Internet of Things is conceived. Not very interesting. This is the Internet of Things. And this takes us to what the Internet of Things can do for the ocean and the ocean economy and the future of the ocean. We live in a world full of information. Almost unlimited information. And the ocean, as part of the world, is not only a place of unlimited information, but it's a place where the amount of information that we could capture versus the amount of information that we do capture is very different. There's a lot we don't know about the ocean. So what we do with the Internet of Things, we say, wouldn't it be great if we could capture as much data as possible about the world? And the only way to do that is automatically. In the 20th century, computers had a fundamental limitation that nobody noticed, which is they got all their data from human beings. Pretty much all the data in computing in the 1900s came via a keyboard, a human being typing in information. Now, if you think about all the information in the world, you can't possibly capture that with people typing. This room, for example, is full of information. There's a certain number of people in this room. They all have names. There's a temperature in this room. There's an air quality in this room. How much water is in this room? Are all the light bulbs working? What volume are we listening to? On and on and on. There is so much information we could capture. You couldn't do that with people typing, partly because they can't perceive some of those things, partly because it's changing all the time. So what we want to do with the Internet of Things is distribute networked connected sensors around the world so they can gather data for us, turn the world into data, put that data onto the Internet. Once it's on the Internet, it doesn't become useful until you make a decision based on the data. Now, just as there's too much information for people to type things in, there's really too much information to create an Excel spreadsheet, for example. And it's changing all the time, and you want to make decisions quickly. So we have now decision-making systems, sometimes called artificial intelligence or machine learning, algorithms, basically, that look at the data all the time and make some kind of choice. A simple example, a self-driving car senses another vehicle in front of it, and an algorithm decides to slow down. That decision may lead to an automated action like the self-driving car slowing down. It may lead to a signal to a human being to do something differently. Tell the driver to put on the brakes, for example. Whatever we do with our decision, that will lead to a change in the world, which we will sense using the Internet of Things, and the cycle begins again. So the Internet of Things is turning the world into data automatically. And there are countless examples already of doing this. And when it works, you don't really notice. Here's one very simple example. It's almost impossible now to imagine navigating without GPS. So if you're driving or walking in a new town, for example, you probably take out your smartphone and you open a Maps application and it tells you where you are and how to get to where you're going. And that is the Internet of Things in action. Your GPS system in your phone is a networked sensor. It needs to be on the Internet so that it can get, for example, up-to-date maps, real-time traffic information, and combine that with your location to tell you how to get to where you're going. And then the automated decision system may include, for example, changing your route if there's traffic ahead. So if you've used GPS in your phone to get somewhere, you've used the Internet of Things. You've seen the whole circle. Turn the world into information, make a decision, start over again. So what does this mean for the ocean? There are hundreds of examples of things that are being done with the Internet of Things in the ocean, things that could be done with the Internet of Things in the ocean. I'm just going to talk about one, which is the fact that we use the ocean for transportation, specifically transportation of goods. And I chose that because we're here in Busan, and as I will show you, Busan is a very important part of the world's shipping routes. But, you know, it's a network is the point. When we think about networks, we think about computer networks most of the time. But before there were computer networks, there were networks of things, trade networks. And one of the oldest is this one, which is all the shipping routes in the world. But just because this is the oldest network in the world does not mean there aren't huge opportunities for change and improvement. And just one example to show you that we can constantly innovate in the ocean and that has massive importance is what has happened to world trade in the last 60 or 70 years. So from 1950 to 1970, world trade, and it says merchandise trade, that's a World Bank term for basically trade excluding services. From 1950 to 1970, we see some growth in world trade, and nearly all world trade happens on the ocean. But what you notice just after 1970 is a sudden upturn, with some peaks and troughs, but there's a change that happens here. And that change happened because of improved technology. And the improved technology in this case was the introduction of internationally standardized shipping containers, which happened exactly 50 years ago. And the difference that made was really dramatic. You could pretty much make the case that all the trade that happened above this dotted line was incremental, and the dominant variable in driving that change was containerization. So globalization is actually oceanization. And that has obviously changed the world and improved the standard of living for billions of people everywhere. And it happened very quickly. So 1965 is pre-containerization, 1970 is post-containerization. Labor efficiency increased about 17-fold. Overnight, almost. Ships became more than twice as big. The cost of insuring freight dropped massively, about 6 times in a couple of years because of new innovation in the ocean. And you can really see the impact when you compare world trade overall, because when you trade goods, you often attach services to them. So better ways to exchange goods often leads to better ways to exchange services. As sea freight costs decreased, world trade increased. There's a lot of complexity about world trade, but overall world trade is good because world trade is cooperation between people from different places. And cooperation leads to peace. So we've seen this decrease in sea freight costs, not just because of containers, but that's one of the big factors making a major contribution, I would argue, to an increase in global trade, peace, and prosperity. But there's a catch. If you look really closely at the chart, you may notice the catch. And it's right here. In the 21st century, for the first time since the Second World War, shipping costs have started to increase. And you'll also notice that the improvement in efficiency had started to flatten out. There's a period just before 1970 when there's a fairly stable rate of change. It's very slight improvement. And then we see again a flattening leading to this bump here. And I would submit that what this shows us is that the power of the shipping container technology has kind of reached its maximum potential. We're not going to get any more improvement from containerization. It's about as good as it's going to be. So we need something else. And the something else, and not just in shipping, in many other areas of the ocean, but shipping as an example, I believe is the Internet of Things. Shipping is very information intensive. So this very complicated chart is an example of how intensive it is. This is actually from the port near where I live. This is Houston in Texas. But you could find a chart like this for any major port anywhere in the world, and this is just a fraction of the process required to import something, to take a shipping container off a ship, put it on a truck, put it on the road. And most of what's happening here is information capture. And this is a tiny fraction of the information that's required to move things around in the ocean. And so much of that information is either not captured at all today, or it's captured manually. So one of the areas that the Internet of Things is starting to transform is information capture in freight. Some examples. These are refrigerated shipping containers known as reefer containers. And they typically take food, perishable things around the world. And one of the big problems with that is if the refrigeration fails, for example, you get either waste and spoilage, or in the worst case scenario, you may actually make people sick because you didn't realize something had gone wrong with the food preservation technology in the container. And what we're seeing over the last few years is the development of Internet of Things technologies. This is a mask technology to actually sense what is happening in each container and share that information over the internet using satellite uplinks from the ship, so that we can have a complete picture of what's happening with those containers, what the quality of the perishable product inside the containers is. And then you can identify waste in advance. You can offload containers earlier if you know they have a problem. You can reduce the amount of food waste in the ocean supply chain. Another example, as we move things from roads to ships and ships to roads, this is called platooning. It's an experimental technology right now, but you have semi-automatic, self-driving trucks moving on the roads in convoys. And the benefit of this is, first of all, you can move freight more quickly because you don't have to worry about drivers resting and sleeping, but also by putting them in a convoy like this, you can have a better aerodynamic situation for the trucks, which means they use less fuel. So it's an increase in efficiency, and what's underlying this is Internet of Things technology in the self-driving vehicle. It's sensing automatically, it's communicating with the network, it's making decisions about how fast to go, how slow to go, when to turn, and so on. I stress, this is just an example, the Internet of Things can also be used to manage fisheries, to identify waste and pollution in the ocean, to monitor the effects of climate change on sea temperature and sea levels, to look at things like wave height. You can distribute sensors anywhere you don't have information and connect them to the internet and find value, and that is the beauty of the Internet of Things. Just to finish up, I want to talk about Korea. It's my firm belief that Korea has a very important leadership role to play in bringing the Internet of Things to the ocean. And there are two reasons why. First of all, what we see in the world's high-tech economies in the Internet of Things age is a reshuffling of leadership. If you think about the personal computing era being the last decades of the 20th century, up until about 2000, you'll see that the United States was by far the leader in high-tech in the world. And other nations such as Germany, Korea, China were way behind. But what happened as we entered the Internet of Things age was great change. China started to rise, Korea started to rise, Germany started to rise, and the United States started to fall. So when we think about leadership in the Internet of Things, really, China is number one, Germany is number two, but coming in a close sort of joint third right now with the US is Korea. And I think what we'll see when the World Bank releases its next round of data is that Korea has surpassed the United States and become the world's third leading high-tech economy, in large part because of advances being made here in the Internet of Things. So Korea is a leader in the Internet of Things. It is also a leader in the ocean economy. The World Bank has a metric called the Liner Shipping Connectivity Index, which basically tells you how connected one country is to the rest of the world by the ocean. It's a measure of how good a country's ports are. And what we've seen since this index was first introduced in 2004 is interesting change. So what this chart shows is how have countries improved their ocean connectivity over time. And what you see is, Japan actually got worse for a while and has picked up a little bit recently. The United States got worse for a while and has picked up a little bit recently. Germany has been improving steadily. China has been improving greatly. And Korea has improved most of all. Korea is second, I think, to China in actual connectivity, ocean connectivity right now, but it is the fastest growing, most improved nation according to this metric. And that's because of Busan. This is the largest port in Korea. It is one of the 5 largest ports in the world, and it is fantastic what has been done here to drive the Korean economy. So to conclude, there's a huge opportunity to bring the Internet of Things to the ocean, to use the Internet of Things to monitor and understand the ocean, whether it's fisheries, whether it's freight, whether it's ecology. And Korea has a massive opportunity to take a leadership role in the future of the ocean economy by taking advantage of its leadership in the area of the Internet of Things. You know, I would argue that today our picture of the ocean looks a little bit like that picture of Pluto from over 80 years ago. But where we're headed with the work of everybody here and the things we will learn and discover over the next few days is to a picture as detailed as this one and an understanding of the ocean as detailed as this one. To my friends in Busan, I say, Dandi Hara. Thank you.